Hello and welcome to this episode of Global Review, where we bring in intense discussion on this week's key developments on various global issues. I am Sachin Chaturvedi. Let's have a look at the headlines. US-China trade war intensifies. China comes up with new responses. Expulsion of Russian diplomat continues. More countries join United States and UK. China launches its aid agency, Development Cooperation Agency, to expand Belt and Road Initiative further. With new attack through missiles, Iran and Saudi Arabia fights intensify. Uzbekistan has come forward to mediate in Afghanistan. More talks between Afghanistan and Taliban. Egypt holds its presidential elections. Welcome. Now we would have a look at in our program on Across the Globe section, in which we would try to bring forward the new debate which has intensified the control on the way we are looking at technology. How new technology is controlling our perception. The Cambridge Analytica has thrown up many questions, more questions in terms of how responsible use of technology and how public perception is addressed through technology. Let's have a look at this report. This report brings out the key challenges that are coming up in terms of the more facts in terms of the development and of course the kind of new challenges that it's posing in terms of governance of ICT. Let's have a look.
The main allegation on the data analytical firm Cambridge Analytica so far has been its unconsented usage of personal information harvested from more than 50 million Facebook profiles to influence the US elections, specifically to aid the Trump campaign. Cambridge Analytica was created when Steve Bannon approached conservative mega donors Rebecca and Robert Mercer to fund a political consulting firm. Bannon became vice president of Cambridge Analytica, and during the 2016 election, he reached out to the Trump campaign to introduce the two sides. Bannon then eventually became a senior advisor to Trump before he was fired in August 2017. The allegation soon deepened as the CEO of the firm, Alexander Nix, was exposed by a news channel, giving examples of how the firm could swing elections around the world. The tactics, as mentioned by Nix, included honey traps, fake news campaigns, and operation by ex-spies to influence election campaigns worldwide. Cambridge Analytica and its parent company, Strategic Communication Laboratories, have worked in 200 elections globally. Within Europe, it is speculated that they have influenced the political campaigning in Italy in 2012, the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine, and recently they have also been linked to Brexit. In Africa, Cambridge Analytica helped Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya twice and influenced the Nigerian presidential elections in 2015. There were plans to help a candidate in Mexico this year and other prospecting candidates in Brazil. The firm's reach also crept into Asia, one of the countries being Malaysia, supporting the Prime Minister Najib Razak in the 2013 elections. Lastly, the political parties in India are also said to be the firm's clients.
Welcome back. To discuss some of the key issues that are there, which this report has highlighted in terms of fighting for perception, access to data without prior informed consent, also using it for commercial purposes of all different kinds. We have an eminent panel today here to discuss it. Professor Sreeram Chaulia from Jindal University is here with us. Senior journalist S. Venkatarayan is with us, and Associate Director of TERI, Dr. Nityananda. So first, I must start with you, Mr. Venkatarayan, in terms of how you look at the key questions that Cambridge Analytica has thrown up for our wider policy discussions.
You know, it's very clear that there are no adequate restrictions on the way the information Facebook users willingly provide to Facebook. And it all began with the University of Cambridge approaching Facebook and Facebook providing information about 270,000 Facebook users who are persuaded by Cambridge University's Cambridge Analytica to part with the information about themselves for a modest amount of money, and about 270,000 people agreed to pay that money. But what Cambridge Analytica did was they got hold of information of friends of all these 270,000 Facebook users who willingly parted with information about themselves. In the process, they collected information from 50 million Facebook users, and those people did not know that information about them was being used. This is obviously cheating, very serious matter. Granted, there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world, but there ought to be strict restrictions about the information innocent people. And every month 2.2 billion people are using Facebook.
Exactly. And Sreeram, how you look at global governance in this area, because it has thrown up many challenges. It's pity that the Information Technology Agreement of WTO, which looks into and which could have helped in terms of bringing in privacy related legislations, it focuses only on the trade component. But what about the responsibility part which technology brings in?
Yes, Sachin, there are two big policy concerns coming out of this scandal. The first is, of course, the privacy of ordinary netizens, which is being compromised without their knowledge and without any prior consent and so on. And the second, and something which is more shadowy, is the way these operators or so-called information disseminators are able to manipulate political outcomes. If they are saying they have consulted in 200 elections worldwide, and they are claiming probably some of it is also little bit garnished image of what they are doing, but essentially what they are saying is, you give us some money, anyone, and we will get you the data and sell you the data, and in the process we can fix election outcomes. So, what is the meaning of democracy itself? So, these are the bigger concerns that have been. So, in terms of governance, I will say that one is at the national level. We have to obviously fix the illegality behind these operations, but one is at the intergovernmental level, as you said, at the ITU.
That's the bigger challenge, because if you look at the kind of trans-border management of technology, particularly in an age where countries and networks are interdependent, interwoven, how we bring in legislation. So, Dr. Nitya, you have worked on regimes that have governed biodiversity. So, for physical things, you can bring in legislations, but how about things that are connected through clouds? What kind of governance we can really bring in?
It's a real challenge. Of course, those data protection and not taking prior, these kind of things are there, but much of it happened on the ethical practice of the researchers. We are a researcher, we do that. So, it raises a question that today if I ask somebody as a researcher, will people trust me if I am misusing the promise I am making? But it raises a bigger question that Facebook users are not from one country. Our elections are governed by certain law, constitutional arrangements, and the political parties, the government, the media, everybody has some code of conduct, what you cannot do, what you can do during some elections. Now, if any political party in India hires me to do a survey about anything about political, there is nothing wrong in it, and if I go and do research in an ethical manner. But here, we do not know what is happening, and if those things are happening which are in contradiction to our legal provisions that should conduct our election free and fair manner. Now, how will I take action against people who might not be sitting in India?
Exactly.
So, that is a big challenge.
Transnational nature of this threat, because see, the worldwide internet is open access, and someone sitting somewhere, that's why it's more devious. When you look at the Cambridge Analytica, the forces behind it, Stephen K. Bannon was behind it, and they're saying they're talking about information warfare and how they can manipulate and cynically design systems. So what it means is
exactly. And in this fight of perceptions, how international affairs, how global inclinations in terms of bringing in certain perceptions through social media, how you see, Mr. Venkatnarayan, what kind of challenge or governance at national level, as Professor Chaulia mentioned, are possible at the national level or at the global level? How you see that as a practical option with us?
Sachin, it's going to be a bit of a challenge because these social media don't have borders, right? If you make a law here, how, it's like pornographic sites. The Supreme gets into the act and they say do this, this, this. The government may be doing that, but they still get away with it because you have no control over it. So let us see, Mark Zuckerberg is going to appear before the US Congress on the 10th of April.
That's right.
And I would reckon that somebody in the government of India, Ravi, has already made certain statement. If we find that our laws are being broken, we will summon Mark Zuckerberg to explain and so on. So I think we should be very strict about it.
Great. So I think
the fake news thing, fake news has become so widely bandied about as this demonic force. But it looks like technology firms are abetting it, and we have to stop this.
And I think we would have to see how better management across borders can be done by national agencies, and of course through an international agreement where we bring in privacy, because more and more cross-border connects, and our own firms, Airtel and many others, are active in many other countries. So data responsibility and its protection is the duty of the companies, and we have gone through BlackBerry's own experience that we had with Canada. So I think those are the legislations. We come to end of this section of our program, and we come to the next one, where we would analyze beyond the news, and we would pick up Africa. Welcome back. In this section, we pick up a story for detailed analysis. We call it Beyond the News. Friends, as you have been watching, apart from electronic media and many newspapers, more discussions and more debates on Africa. Africa-wide free trade agreement has been signed. Today we would discuss what are its imperatives, what kind of challenges Africa would have, and of course the dimension of India-Africa trade, investment, technology linkages. Let's have a look at this report.
"44 African countries signed up to the African Continental Free Trade Area, that is CFTA agreement, creating a single African market that will equally ease mobility of people across the continent. One of the likely potential benefits is to create tens of thousands of jobs and significantly reduce unemployment among the continent's youthful population. Under the trade deal, all signatories would have to agree to reduce the trade tariffs and improve quotas between each other and boost intra-African trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area is similar to the European Single Market, which seeks to guarantee the free movements of goods, capital, services and labour within the 28 EU member states. In contrast to the 71% intra-European trade and 50% intra-Asian trade, Africa trades only 16% among themselves. Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, has opted out of CFTA for the time being. CFTA is a legal protection which is an important principle and an indispensable guarantee for signatories. CFTA doesn't intend to reduce the barriers to trade between two or more countries which are already in existence to help protect local markets and industries. The signatories have tentatively 180 days to ratify the agreement. A network of African business leaders has committed $1 million to facilitate the process of raising awareness about CFTA across the continent. Should all the African countries come on board and the deal is ratified by all the states, it will make Africa the largest single market in the world, with GDP over $, a continent of 55 countries with a population of over 1.2 billion and GDP of over $3.5 trillion.
Excellent. So CFTA is in place and more than 55 countries are party to it. They have kept some fund aside to facilitate the process, create more awareness and bring in the scale of economies in their production and value chains across the globe. This is one of the most ambitious agreements, and if it all comes closer to the reality, it would offer immense opportunities not only for African countries but for the world. Given the fact that Africa is the youngest continent, the benefits could be reaped over next several decades. We have again a very eminent panel to discuss this. Professor Nityananda has been commenting on Africa, its potential, its natural resources and its trade ties. So Nitya, how you look at the opportunity of CFTA? What are the challenges and of course the opportunities that it offers?
I think it's a historic development. It can bring great benefits to Africa. Now let's see why we see that Africa trade has been so low. It's because of historical reasons. Is that we all know that in the colonial period we had what we know as so-called colonial pattern of trade. So essentially the developed countries will sell finished products and they will buy raw materials, intermediate products, agri-goods, minerals, that were there. Now after independence, when African countries tried to develop their industries, they essentially, as like India and many other countries, they thought that infant industry protection is a good idea. They did it. But what was wrong with Africa taking that is that Africa, this infant industry protection works when your domestic market is big enough.
Yeah.
Now if small countries of Africa, when they erect barriers, the domestic market is very, very small.
That's right.
Now when domestic market is very, very small, you cannot have minimum economies of scale.
Yeah.
Now it of course did not succeed. In many countries it have succeeded. Now this, I think, the African tariff is still relatively higher, though it is much lower, it was reduced. But that might give some benefit.
A major challenge for African countries.
The intra-Africa market can give that benefit. Now challenges are of course there.
Exactly.
One is that within Africa infrastructure is very poor.
That's right. Mr. Venkataraman, how you look at the challenges that Nitya is counting, both in terms of size of the domestic market in each country and, as he very rightly mentioned, infrastructure, which is a major limitation. Probably it would have implications for trade facilitation and other measures. What kind of opportunity you see when this market comes up?
Sachin, as I see it, the very fact that South Africa and Nigeria, which account for half of the 3 trillion GDP of the 55 African countries, having an agreement like this is like trying to stage Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. Yeah. So it's very important that these two countries also come on board. And also the development, level of development across Africa is very uneven.
Yeah.
And countries within Africa are not connected with each other. Like East Africa, which is a part of the British Empire, the connections are to London.
Yeah.
West Africa to Paris, the Portuguese this thing to Lisbon, things like that. So even though they are neighbors, there is no connectivity.
That's right.
So it's a major challenge. Another thing they need to do is to, if everybody is producing pulses, everybody is producing cotton, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
They have to come to a decision by which, you divide the whole country into certain segments.
Coordination is there.
And so X number of countries will produce pulses, Y number of pulses, cotton, etc., etc. Unless you do that.
You have been a very avid follower of global developments. You have seen how EU has evolved as a market and the challenges that EU faces, and now the susceptibility that has multiplied taking EU. How you look at CFTA as an opportunity, as Mr. Venkataraman mentioned, that they may identify specific zones with specific crops or production patterns. Is it practically possible?
I think, Sachin, this is doable because at the grassroots level in Africa, there is a sentiment of unity among the peoples, and that has been the driving force. What is we call Pan-Africanism. Now, the elite level, many politicians have tried to create a nationalistic narrative and divided the continent. So in a way, this is a push from below. I see it as a major achievement in that sense. And the 3 big prior pre-existing regional trading groups within Africa, COMESA, SADC and the East African Community. All three were consulted and were part of the process in linking up. So, first they were smaller regions, then now they have linked up, and it is despite the ill will of some of the nationalistic elites and the narrow nationalism. So, I think it is successful, but it needs the continued push from below, the civil society, the activists. They are going to really take this forward, and of course, the business community have to be involved, because they have, some of them have been raising objections. That's why Nigeria, South Africa and the workers' trade unions, they need to be pacified, they need to more internal consultations. But I see it as doable, because in the long run, you know, as you said, economies of scale will matter, and Africans, especially the sub-Saharan, the black Africa, they feel, you know, that they are one people, and ultimately it is that which should drive this integration process.
What do you think, Nitya, where the resources would come from to facilitate the process? As of now, they have kept just $1 million aside for creating more awareness on this ambitious agreement. Where the resources would come in, and what role you see India and other partner countries can play? We had for last 3 days a major India-Africa forum where we discussed key issues with CII and others. How you look at that role for India?
I think resources, you know, generating from within Africa would be a challenge, but you know, looking at other parts, you know, countries in the other parts of the world, how they have helped, I think they should come forward and help them develop infrastructure, because it will also help them in the process. You know, I see, you know, Africa coming together. Many Indian entrepreneurs are looking at Africa, and if they go and invest in Ethiopia, you know, they can go to other countries also easily. So, all countries, China, India and Europe, US, all might have interest in developing the infrastructure. But what is even more important is that Africa do not trade with themselves, and there is not much complementarity.
Exactly.
Now, if anything happens, you know, trade creation will be the only mode. It will not be trade diversion. Because of lack of complementarity, it will not happen that instead of importing from India, you know, an African country will start importing from another African country.
And that's where role of investment comes in. Because if China, India are going to invest in those countries, natural complementarities can be leveraged for integrating the markets, which would happen naturally. But then you require institutions. So who would invest in institutions? And this is what depends on the kind of economic outlook that Africa has. And this is what today we have picked up in our section, where we discuss at least one resource, key resource, to understand the theme that we pick up in our this section on Beyond the News. So in our next section on Book Review, we have picked up the new report which has come out from African Development Bank. Let's have Book Review. Welcome back. We have picked up today this latest report from African Development Bank, the Outlook 2018 for Africa, in which they have discussed the key economic parameters, in which they have come up with specific empirical debates and data on how Africa would grow in next 5 years. The report also talks about investment opportunities, the point that Nitya was mentioning. And of course, it also talks about the transport and infrastructure. Sreeram, what do you see about the report?
The key trend, Sachin, which I picked was that they are saying that in the last 5 years or so, there's a decline in foreign investment in African infrastructure building. The Chinese had risen to a very high level, but because China started having serious internal, you know, stock market crashes and a deceleration of its own economy, it has reduced its commitment. And I think China is focusing more and more on Belt and Road Initiative rather than on Africa as a strategic priority right now.
And that
so India, and it says that India is stepping up. So that's the key, you know, because as you know, the others have to pick up the slack when and then there are multilateral bodies, the African Development Bank itself is there. But what is most fascinating, Sachin, this is a sign of the changing world order. The Western institutions, World Bank and IMF, although they are present, are declining in their importance in Africa.
And I think it's very encouraging, Sreeram, that during the International Solar Alliance, we had AFDB as our partner. And AFDB very well knows that India, when it is trying to go for greater and intense industrialization, we have a strategy to move ahead with lesser carbon footprint.
And
Our
Sachin,
idea of having 175 gigawatts by 2022, which Prime Minister Modi has so emphatically articulated. Terry has come out with n number of papers on this strategy. Africa has a great opportunity to build on Indian experience.
That's right, Sachin. And you know, at the end of the day, what the AFDB is saying is, you know, industrialization, diversification, and continental integration in terms of trade, all these three if you put together, that's when you see the demographic dividend of Africa. You know, it's the youngest continent on the planet. The average age is just 19 years.
Very good. We are now running out of time, Sreeram. One quick comments, Nitya, from you, and then I would have Mr. Venkatnarayan step in. Just closing remark on how India-Africa partnership can move forward.
I think India has achieved a lot, you know, since independence. You know, for example, India was, you know, was food deficient in 60s. Now we are food surplus.
That's very important lesson for Africa to pick up on agriculture.
It's the opposite. They are food sufficient in 60s.
Mr. Venkatnarayan, what you think is important lesson?
I think we can do a lot, Sachin. You know, we have allotted $1 billion, you know, to take International Solar Alliance to Africa. And we have several $billion which we have promised during the India-Africa summits. They have been
solar energy is your message. Sreeram.
Asia-Africa growth corridor. You know, we can fill in. If the Chinese are cutting down, we can fill in.
Excellent. Thanks, colleagues, for this extremely stimulating discussion. We come to a close of this episode of our global review. I would request you to send across your comments, ideas, suggestions. We would come back to you next Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Till then, take care. Goodbye.